Ethan had always trusted. He believed in love, in loyalty, in building a life with someone side by side. But life has a cruel way of testing patience, faith, and the sturdiness of our hearts. He and Mia had been together for years, living under the same roof, sharing routines, laughter, and occasional disagreements. Lately, though, the air between them had grown thick, arguments over small things, silent dinners, and cold shoulders in the mornings. One Tuesday evening, Mia announced she was visiting her family 600 kilometers away for a week. Ethan forced a smile, trying to hide the pit forming in his stomach. "Sure," he said. "Enjoy your time." It was a lie, he didn't trust it. The next night, a message from a mutual friend caught him off guard, a photo of Mia laughing over coffee with someone else. His heart sank, but he brushed it off, hoping it was a fluke, a coincidence. 2 days later, curiosity got the better of him. Ethan scrolled through social media, and there it was, Mia, radiant, carefree, sitting on a restaurant patio, hand in hand with her ex. Every moment of her happiness captured in vivid color. His stomach turned, but his mind started working. He quietly took screenshots, careful not to let anger dictate his actions. Revenge, he realized, needed a plan. Not a rash storm of emotion, but precise, calculated, undeniable justice. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the photos. The cracks in their relationship weren't just cracks anymore. They were fissures, impossible to ignore. And in that moment, a cool, terrifying clarity took over. He would act, but he would do it his way. Ethan spent the next few days in a quiet, calculated haze. He didn't call, didn't accuse, didn't confront. Instead, he observed, noted, and planned. Mia's absence from the apartment gave him the perfect vantage point. He noticed the little things she had taken for granted, how she left her clothes scattered, the way she treated the shared space as if it were hers alone. Every detail, every habit, added to the picture he was quietly painting. He was on a month-to-month lease, which gave him an advantage. A 60-day notice could be given at any time, and Mia, not being on the lease, had no claim. Ethan realized he didn't just want closure, he wanted justice, and timing would be everything. He started scouting for a new place, a small but modern apartment a few neighborhoods away. Every viewing he attended was measured, precise. He even smiled politely at the agents, concealing the storm building in his mind. Meanwhile, he stayed distant with Mia. He brought up couples therapy once, almost as a formality, but never pressed. The intimacy between them faded naturally. Sex became awkward, infrequent, and mostly avoided by both parties. Ethan kept his focus on the bigger picture. Mia, oblivious to his inner workings, spent nights out late, sometimes claiming she was staying over with friends. Ethan simply said, "Okay," his calm demeanor hiding the calculations behind every word. The plan was simple, elegant in its precision. He would let her think the status quo remained, all the while orchestrating a move that would leave her with nothing but the truth and the photos he had captured. Ethan knew one thing for certain. Revenge wasn't about anger. It was about timing, execution, and above all, poise. The following weeks were a careful dance. Ethan became almost invisible in the apartment, quiet, distant, polite. He answered her questions with measured calm, never letting his emotions betray his plan. Mia, for her part, seemed oblivious. She laughed louder on phone calls, spent long nights out, and occasionally mentioned friends she was crashing with. Ethan nodded along, even offered to pick up groceries or handle minor chores, but he never pressed. During this time, he meticulously packed away his own personal things in a rented storage unit. Small, insignificant items at first, nothing that would arouse suspicion. Furniture, electronics, and valuable possessions were left untouched. They would play a bigger role later. Ethan also coordinated with the landlord, a pragmatic and understanding man who had known him for years. They discussed the new tenant, schedules, and the upcoming move quietly. The The landlord knew Ethan's temperament and trusted his judgment. The key to Ethan's plan was timing. Everything had to align perfectly. At night, Ethan reviewed the photos of Mia with her ex. He didn't feel the burning rage of the past. He felt calm, almost clinical. Each image was a reminder that the betrayal had been real, that his instincts were correct, and that the moment of truth would soon arrive. Every interaction with Mia became a subtle chess move. He offered suggestions for therapy but never pushed. He avoided intimacy but didn't show resentment. He let her think she was still in control of the situation, while he quietly tightened the threads of his plan. In his mind, the countdown had begun. Soon, the final act would play out, and everything would fall perfectly into place. Ethan's biggest weapon wasn't anger, confrontation, or even the photos. It was the lease. The month-to-month agreement gave him full legal leverage. 60 days' notice was all he needed, and Mia, not being on the lease, had no claim. He sent the notice quietly, a few days after Mia left for her family. It was formal, polite, and perfectly timed, exactly 60 days before his intended move-out date. With that done, the next step was preparation. Ethan began lining up movers and setting up his new place. He wanted a crew that was professional, discreet, and efficient. Every detail was considered. The schedule, the boxes, even the timing of when Mia would be in the apartment versus out. Meanwhile, he maintained the same detached demeanor with Mia. When she called to chat, he was polite but distant. When she mentioned coming home early, he simply said, "Okay, see you then." Every interaction was measured. No fights, no ultimatums, no emotional outbursts, just patience. Even the landlord was part of the silent operation. He allowed Ethan to show the apartment to prospective tenants while Mia was out, ensuring the future handover would be smooth. No one suspected the storm that was quietly brewing under the surface. Ethan felt a strange satisfaction in the calmness of it all. There was no drama, no shouting, no immediate confrontation. The real power lay in control, and he had it entirely. Ethan spent the next few weeks observing quietly, never rushing, never showing the slightest hint of his plan. Mia continued her carefree routine, unaware that her secret outings and late-night escapades were being silently documented. He noticed patterns, the cafes she visited, the friends she claimed to stay with, and the subtle changes in her behavior when she thought no one was watching. He didn't confront her. Confrontation would ruin the elegance of what he had meticulously arranged. One evening, scrolling through social media, Ethan saw a new photo that made his chest tighten. Mia laughing, close and intimate with her ex at a restaurant he'd once suggested for a date. The moment was undeniable. He took screenshots, adding to the growing evidence of her betrayal. Even in these moments, Ethan maintained a calm exterior. Friends who called or texted checked in on him, expecting anger or tears. He replied politely, almost disinterestedly. But inside, every action he took was deliberate, like moves on a chessboard. Each observation, each note, each calculated silence was another step toward the final act. By now, he wasn't just preparing a move. He was preparing a revelation. The truth, when finally unveiled, would leave Mia with nothing but the consequences of her choices. As the move-out date approached, Ethan's demeanor remained unnervingly calm. To anyone looking in, he seemed almost unaffected by the betrayal, the late-night outings, and the hidden life Mia had been living. This calm, however, was the result of careful preparation and precise timing. He continued coordinating with the landlord, ensuring that new tenant viewings and inspections were scheduled while Mia was out, further masking his plans. The landlord trusted him completely and even subtly assisted by keeping things quiet on his end. Ethan started subtly hinting at couples therapy during their occasional conversations, but never pressed. It was a distraction, a way to keep Mia thinking there might still be a chance, while he silently cemented his strategy. At home, he packed away his personal items in secret storage units, small boxes first, then gradually larger ones, so nothing could be claimed by Mia. He observed her habits carefully, noting what belonged to him and what didn't. Everything would eventually be accounted for. Evenings were spent reviewing the photos he had taken, mentally rehearsing how the reveal would unfold. He imagined her shock, the disbelief, and ultimately the helplessness. Ethan didn't feel rage anymore. He felt anticipation, a patient, cool anticipation that only comes when justice is fully in your hands. The apartment remained quiet, the days ticking by. Every second brought him closer to the final act, the moment where every calculated step would culminate in perfect execution. The morning of the move finally arrived. Ethan had coordinated every detail down to the minute. A professional moving crew was scheduled to arrive early, long before Mia would be awake or notice anything unusual. He brewed his coffee, calmly sipped it, and reviewed the photos one last time. Everything was in place: the movers, the new apartment, the boxes, and most importantly, the timeline. When the crew knocked on the door, Ethan greeted them with his usual calm demeanor, giving precise instructions. They began boxing up his belongings efficiently. Mia, curious about the noise, wandered into the living room and froze. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to mask surprise. Ethan handed her a few printed photos. "I think these explain it better than I ever could." Mia's eyes widened. The images were undeniable, her laughing, close, intimate with her ex. For the first time in weeks, the carefree mask dropped. Before she could speak, the landlord arrived, calmly reinforcing the situation. "You have until midnight to remove your things. The new tenants move in 2 days and everything else will be put on the curb." Mia's shock was palpable. She stammered, tried to argue, but Ethan's composure was unwavering. His plan, months in the making, was now unfolding perfectly. The movers continued their work, boxing up the rest of Ethan's belongings, leaving her with only what she could carry. For Ethan, the morning felt like a quiet victory. There was no shouting, no drama, just the satisfying execution of a plan carried out with precision. By midday, the apartment had transformed. Boxes lined the walls, furniture was stacked neatly, and Ethan's personal items were ready for transport. Mia, now fully realizing the situation, wandered through the apartment in stunned disbelief. Ethan remained calm, almost serene as he observed her. There was no gloating, no yelling, just quiet justice. He motioned toward the main room, where her clothes, toiletries, and personal effects were piled haphazardly. "This is what's left," he said softly. "Everything else is mine, and it's already packed." Mia's face turned pale. She looked from the boxes to the photos and back at Ethan, her voice trembling. You can't do this." "I can," he replied evenly. "You're not on the lease, and I gave notice. Everything here that's mine is leaving, and the rest, well, it's yours to take with you." The landlord chimed in gently but firmly, reminding her of the deadline. There was no room for negotiation, no loopholes. Ethan pulled out his phone and snapped one last photo. Mia, surrounded by the remnants of what she had once called home, the evidence of her betrayal, and the undeniable reality that she had lost control. It was a moment of quiet triumph, executed flawlessly, and witnessed only by those who had orchestrated it. By evening, Mia had gathered what she could carry. The apartment, once shared and familiar, now felt alien to her. Boxes lined the hallways, and the furniture, Ethan's carefully chosen pieces, was ready for transport. She had no choice but to accept the reality. She had been outplayed, and there was no turning back. Ethan moved calmly among the crew, ensuring everything went smoothly. He didn't revel in her discomfort. Instead, he maintained a quiet, professional demeanor. His satisfaction came from the precision of the execution, not the chaos it caused. The landlord, ever discreet, offered a sympathetic glance to Mia, but did nothing to interfere. He respected Ethan's planning and professionalism. Outside, the city lights began to flicker on as the sun dipped. Mia, now carrying a single bag, glanced back at the apartment one last time. The place that had been her home, her playground, her sanctuary, was now entirely Ethan's domain. For Ethan, the relief was palpable. Months of careful observation, planning, and silent maneuvering had culminated in a flawless execution. He didn't need to gloat. The images, the packed boxes, and Mia's stunned expression said everything. That night, as the movers left and the apartment stood empty of betrayal, Ethan finally allowed himself to breathe. The storm had passed, leaving only calm, justice, and the quiet satisfaction of a plan carried out perfectly. Word of Ethan's methodical, cool-headed execution spread quickly among his friends. Over drinks and late-night hangouts, the story was told and retold, each retelling emphasizing the precision, patience, and sheer elegance of his plan. "No yelling, no chaos, just flawless," one friend said, shaking his head in disbelief. "He made it look effortless." Ethan, when asked, would simply smile faintly, offering no commentary. The story had become legendary in their circle, not because of cruelty, but because of the artistry of his revenge. They laughed over the photo he had snapped of Mia among her belongings, all evidence neatly displayed like a cautionary tale. It was a testament to quiet strength, control, and planning, a lesson in how justice doesn't always need theatrics. Ethan never needed validation. The satisfaction came from knowing he had remained composed while the truth unfolded. Mia's betrayal had been real, but she hadn't expected the calm, deliberate consequences that followed. The apartment was now his alone, the new place ready, and life began its slow return to normal. Friends continued to admire, tease, and sometimes envy the meticulousness with which he handled the situation. And somewhere deep down, Ethan felt a quiet pride, not in revenge itself, but in how he had managed to reclaim his life with dignity and composure. Weeks after the move, Ethan finally felt the weight lift off his shoulders. The apartment, once a battleground of silent tension, was now just a memory. His new place felt fresh, untouched by betrayal, a blank canvas for the life he wanted to rebuild. Mia had disappeared from his daily life, leaving only the faint sting of past wounds. The photos, the boxes, the careful planning, all of it, had provided the closure he needed. He didn't dwell on anger anymore. The situation had resolved itself through patience and strategy. Even when friends brought up the story, Ethan spoke minimally. He didn't need to relive the satisfaction. It lived in the quiet knowledge that he had handled the betrayal perfectly. He allowed himself to focus on what truly mattered, rebuilding routines, cultivating hobbies, and slowly reclaiming joy that had been overshadowed by mistrust and disappointment. Closure, he realized, wasn't about vengeance or confrontation. It was about control, about reclaiming one's life, and about ensuring that those who betrayed him couldn't leave chaos in their wake. Ethan had done that flawlessly. Months passed, and life began to regain a sense of normalcy for Ethan. The sting of betrayal had dulled, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from knowing he had handled the situation with grace and precision. He decorated his new apartment with care, each piece of furniture, each photograph, and each small detail reflecting a life rebuilt on his terms. The space was no longer just a home. It was a symbol of autonomy, resilience, and the calm power of calculated action. Friends continued to check in, some still teasing about the legendary eviction, but Ethan met each comment with a small, knowing smile. The story had become more than personal revenge. It was a reminder of the importance of composure and patience in the face of betrayal. Occasionally he would think of Mia, what she had lost, the life she had left behind. He felt no triumphal glee, only a quiet affirmation. Life moved forward, and those who had hurt him were now irrelevant in his new chapter. Ethan's focus turned to himself. his ambitions, and the relationships that genuinely mattered. Trust, once broken, could now be rebuilt carefully, selectively, with people who deserved it. The past, once heavy, had become a teaching moment, and Ethan stepped fully into a life defined by control, dignity, and deliberate action. Among friends and acquaintances, Ethan's story had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about strategic brilliance, patience, and composure under pressure. Whenever someone recounted the tale, they emphasized his calm demeanor, the methodical execution, and the flawless timing. He didn't yell, didn't fight. He just let the plan unfold, they would say, shaking their heads in awe. Ethan, however, never let the legend inflate his ego. To him, it wasn't about recognition. It was about reclaiming control and ensuring justice in the most efficient, controlled way possible. New friends who visited his apartment were unaware of the story, yet those who did always noticed a subtle aura of confidence. It wasn't arrogance. It was the quiet strength of someone who had faced betrayal and emerged unshaken. Even in casual conversation, Ethan had learned to observe, plan, and act with discretion. Life had taught him that the most effective outcomes didn't come from drama or anger, but from patience and clarity of purpose. In social circles, he became known not only as a reliable friend, but also as someone whose reputation for composure and sharp judgment was almost legendary, a reputation that would precede him wherever he went. Ethan reflected often on the months leading up to the move. Betrayal, he realized, could either break a person or teach them invaluable lessons about patience, observation, and self-respect. He had chosen the latter. He understood now that revenge wasn't about humiliation or cruelty. It was about reclaiming power in a controlled, deliberate way. By acting calmly, planning carefully, and letting the situation unfold naturally, he had ensured that justice was served without compromising his dignity. The experience also reshaped his understanding of relationships. Trust, once broken, required discernment and care. Ethan now knew he could protect his boundaries while still being open to meaningful connections. Friends continued to marvel at the elegance of his strategy. Some joked that no Hollywood script could match the precision of his plan, and others admired the serenity with which he executed it. Ethan, however, kept his focus inward. He had not only survived betrayal, he had mastered the art of moving forward with composure, making decisions with clarity, and embracing life on his own terms. The final chapter of that turbulent period arrived not with fireworks or confrontation, but with quiet inevitability. Mia's belongings were gone, the apartment fully under Ethan's control, and the new tenants had moved in without incident. Ethan sat in his new living room, the golden afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Everything was in its place, every item carefully arranged, every memory of betrayal transformed into a lesson in strategy and patience. He glanced at the last photo he had taken of Mia, her possessions in a pile, the stark evidence of her choices. There was no malice in his gaze, only the satisfaction of justice served. Not impulsive, not vengeful, perfectly executed, cool, and undeniable. Life moved forward. Friends still recounted the story, laughing at the audacity and precision, but Ethan no longer needed their validation. He had proven to himself that patience, composure, and careful planning were far more powerful than anger or rash action. And in the calm that followed, Ethan finally allowed himself to feel free. Betrayal no longer defined him, it had refined him. The legend of his quiet, flawless revenge would live on in stories among friends, but for Ethan, it was simply the day he reclaimed his life, his space, and his peace of mind.